The news traveled fast across the galaxy like wildfire spreading through dry grass. Every major species had heard about the legendary dragons of Draconis Prime, and now they all wanted to prove their hunting skills on the most dangerous world known to exist. The planet hung in space like a green and blue jewel surrounded by 3 silver moons that cast strange shadows across its surface during the long nights. Ancient forests covered most of the land, while crystal-clear rivers ran down from snow-capped mountains where the dragons were said to make their homes. Commander Zethan of the Zephyrian hunting fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the planet grow larger on the main viewing screen. His species had conquered dozens of worlds using their advanced technology and superior battle tactics, but Draconis Prime would be their greatest victory. The Zephyrians were tall, blue-skinned beings with 4 arms and large black eyes that could see across multiple light spectrums. At once they had brought 12 warships loaded with energy nets, plasma restraints, and sonic disruptors, designed specifically for capturing large, dangerous creatures. Zethan had spent 6 months studying every piece of data about the dragons and their behavior patterns before launching this expensive expedition. The dragons were massive beasts, standing 30 feet tall with wingspans that could block out the sun when they flew overhead. Their scales were harder than battle armor, and their breath could melt through the strongest metals used in starship construction. Intelligence reports suggested the dragons possessed near-human-level thinking abilities and could communicate with each other using complex sound patterns. But Zethan was confident that Zephyrian technology would overcome any challenge these primitive beasts could present. The hunting fleet entered orbit around Draconis Prime and began scanning the surface for dragon nesting sites using advanced sensor arrays. There detected several large heat signatures in the northern mountain ranges, where caves and rocky outcroppings provided perfect hiding places. Zethan ordered his ships to deploy hunting parties at 6 different locations to maximize their chances of success. Each team carried the best equipment the Zephyrian military could provide, including powered armor suits and heavy weapons platforms. The first team landed near a volcanic ridge where thermal sensors had detected multiple dragon signatures. Moving through underground tunnel systems, team leader Captain Vex led 20 warriors into the cave network, carrying portable energy nets and stun weapons, rated for creatures 10 times larger than themselves. The caves were deeper than expected, with passages stretching for miles through solid rock worn smooth by centuries of dragon movement. Strange crystals embedded in the walls gave off a soft blue light that made the tunnels seem almost magical. After 3 hours of careful exploration, the hunting team found their first dragon. It was a young male with bright red scales sleeping on a bed of precious gems in a circular chamber, deep underground. Captain Vex signaled his warriors to surround the sleeping beast and prepare their energy nets for a coordinated capture attempt. But the moment they powered up their weapons, the dragon opened one golden eye and looked directly at them. The creature moved faster than anything that large should have been able to move. It rolled to its feet in one fluid motion while simultaneously breathing a stream of superheated flame that melted their energy nets into useless scrap metal. The warriors fired their stun weapons, but the electrical charges simply bounced off the dragon scales without causing any visible effect. Captain Vex ordered an immediate retreat as the dragon began moving toward them with obvious hostile intent. The hunting team ran through the tunnel system as fast as their powered armor would allow, while the dragon followed. At a leisurely pace, it seemed to be playing with them rather than trying to catch them like a cat toying with frightened mice. When they finally reached the surface, the dragon emerged from the cave entrance and launched itself into the air with powerful wing beats. It circled overhead once as if to make sure they understood the message, then disappeared back into the mountain caves. Similar disasters befell the other 5 hunting teams scattered across the planet's surface. The second team lost half their equipment when a pack of dragons coordinated an ambush using tactics that would have impressed military strategists. The third team found themselves trapped in a canyon when dragons began dropping large boulders from the cliffs above. Fourth team discovered that dragons could somehow become invisible to their sensor equipment, making it impossible to track or target them effectively. The fifth team encountered dragons that could generate powerful electromagnetic pulses which disabled all their electronic equipment simultaneously. The sixth team never made contact with any dragons at all, but found their landing site surrounded by strange symbols carved into the rock that seemed to be some form of warning. After 2 weeks, Of failed attempts, Commander Zethan was forced to admit defeat and order a complete withdrawal from Draconis Prime. The Zephyrian hunting fleet limped back to their home system with damaged equipment, empty cargo holds, and seriously wounded Pride news of their failure spread quickly through galactic communication networks, causing shock and disbelief among other species who had planned similar expeditions. The crystalline Vortani were next to try their luck on the Dragon world. They were a race of living crystal beings who possessed powerful telepathic abilities that allowed them to control the minds of most organic creatures. High Resonator Kalith led a small but elite team of psionic specialists who believed their mental powers would make capturing dragons a simple task. The Vortani had successfully tamed wild beasts on dozens of worlds using their telepathic control techniques. They landed their crystalline ships in the same mountain regions where the Zephyrians had failed and began broadcasting powerful mental commands. The dragons responded by appearing in large numbers around the landing sites, but instead of being controlled, they seemed merely curious about these strange crystal visitors. High Resonator Kalith attempted to establish mental contact with the largest dragon present. The moment their minds touched, the dragon sent back such a powerful telepathic pulse that Kalith collapsed unconscious. The other Vortani tried to maintain their mental barriers, but found themselves overwhelmed by the raw psychic strength of creatures they had assumed were primitive beasts. The dragons proved completely immune to all forms of telepathic control and seemed almost amused by the Vortani attempts to dominate their minds. After losing 3 team members to psychic feedback, the Vortani hastily retreated from Draconis Prime. The news of the Vortani defeat sent shockwaves through the galactic community. If beings with such powerful mental abilities could not control the dragons, then perhaps a more direct approach was needed. The Korath Empire decided they would succeed where others had failed. The Korath were massive humanoid warriors standing 8 feet tall with thick armor plating that grew naturally from their skin. Their entire civilization was built around concepts of honor, strength, and military conquest. General Threk commanded the most elite battalion in the Korath military forces. His troops had never failed to complete a mission, no matter how dangerous or impossible it seemed to others. The Korath approach was simple and direct. They would use overwhelming firepower and superior numbers to crush any resistance the dragons might offer. 3 heavy assault cruisers entered orbit around Draconis Prime carrying 2,000 Korath warriors and enough military equipment to level entire cities. Orbital bombardment platforms were deployed to provide covering fire while ground forces established secure landing zones. General Thrak studied the failures of previous expeditions and concluded that they had been too cautious in their approach. The dragons were clearly intelligent and dangerous, but they were still just animals that could be defeated with proper military tactics. The first wave of Korath dropships landed in the Central Valley region where intelligence reports indicated the highest concentration of dragon activity. Each warrior carried heavy plasma rifles and wore powered battle armor that could withstand direct hits from most energy weapons. Armored vehicles and mobile artillery platforms were deployed to create fortified positions around the landing sites. Within hours, the Korath had established a military base complete with defensive walls, sensor arrays, and communication equipment. General Thrak was confident that this show of force would intimidate the dragons into either fleeing or surrendering without a fight. He was wrong. The dragons observed the Korath military buildup from hidden positions in the surrounding hills and forests. They seemed to understand that these newcomers represented a more serious threat than previous visitors. On the second day of the occupation, 3 dragons appeared on the ridge overlooking the main Korath base. They were magnificent creatures with scales that shimmered like polished metal in the afternoon sunlight. General Thrak ordered his artillery units to open fire immediately. Plasma shells and energy beams struck the ridge where the dragons had been standing. When the smoke cleared, the dragons were gone, but the message they left behind was unmistakable. Every piece of electronic equipment in the base had stopped working simultaneously. Weapons, computers, communication systems, and even basic life support units had been disabled by some unknown force. The Korath warriors found themselves stranded on an alien world with no way to contact their ships or call for reinforcements. General Thrak ordered his troops to fall back to secondary positions, while engineering teams tried to restore power to critical systems. But the dragons were not finished with their demonstration. Throughout the night, strange sounds echoed across the valley. Korath sentries reported seeing massive shapes moving through the darkness, just beyond the range of their portable lights. By morning, it became clear that the dragons had surrounded the entire military base during the hours of darkness. They had done so without triggering a single alarm or motion sensor. The Korath found themselves trapped in a siege situation, but their enemies remained largely invisible. Occasionally, a dragon would appear on a distant hilltop or flying high overhead, but they made no aggressive moves. General Thrak realized that the dragons were playing a psychological warfare game. They were demonstrating their ability to strike at any time while keeping the Korath forces in a constant state of alert. After 3 days without sleep, his warriors were exhausted and demoralized. The dragons had proven they could disable advanced technology, neutralize superior firepower, and outmaneuver elite military units. On the 4th day, General Thrak made the difficult decision to abandon the mission. The Korath evacuation was a humiliating retreat under the watchful eyes of creatures they had expected to capture easily. As their dropships lifted off from the planet's surface, dozens of dragons appeared along the ridgelines. They made no attempt to attack the departing vessels, but their message was clear. Draconis Prime belonged to the dragons, and they would defend it against any invaders. The failure of 3 major galactic powers to capture even a single dragon became the most talked-about news story in recent memory. Military analysts studied the tactical reports, trying to understand how such advanced civilizations could be defeated by what appeared to be primitive beasts. Scientists debated whether the dragons possessed some form of technology that was beyond current understanding. Philosophers questioned whether intelligence and wisdom might be more important than raw power in determining the outcome of conflicts. Meanwhile, on hundreds of worlds across the galaxy, other species began canceling their own planned expeditions to Draconis Prime. The dragon world had gained a reputation as an impossible challenge that would destroy the careers and reputations of anyone foolish enough to attempt it. Gambling syndicates started taking bets on which species would be brave or stupid enough to try. Next, most bookmakers gave odds of 1,000 to 1 against any successful dragon capture. The dragons themselves seemed unaware of their growing fame throughout the galactic community. They continued their peaceful existence in the mountains and forests of their beautiful world, but unknown to everyone watching and waiting. A small human cargo ship was about to change everything. Captain Amy Rodriguez was a simple freight hauler who had never heard of Draconis Prime or its legendary dragons. She transported supplies between distant colonies for a modest living and minded her own business. Her ship was old and reliable, but not particularly fast or well-equipped compared to modern vessels. Amy had been traveling the same trade routes for 15 years and knew every port and space station in her sector. She was the last person anyone would expect to succeed where the greatest military forces in the galaxy had failed. But sometimes the most extraordinary achievements come from the most ordinary people in the most unexpected ways. Amy Rodriguez was having the worst day of her career as a freight hauler. Her navigation computer had crashed 3 hours into what should have been a routine supply run to the outer colony worlds. The backup systems were also malfunctioning, leaving her stranded in an unfamiliar star system with no idea which direction led home. Amy was an experienced pilot, but she had always relied on automated navigation to handle the complex calculations needed for interstellar travel. Without her computer, she was essentially flying blind through space. The nearest planet appeared to be habitable according to her basic sensors, so Amy decided to land and try to repair her navigation equipment. She had a small toolkit and some spare parts in her cargo. That might be enough to get her systems working again. Amy guided her ship toward the planet's surface using manual controls and visual navigation. It felt strange to be flying without computer assistance, but she managed to find a suitable landing site near what appeared to be a mountain stream. The planet was beautiful with crystal-clear air and stunning natural scenery that reminded her of vacation pictures from old Earth. Amy had grown up on a crowded space station and rarely had the chance to visit worlds with such pristine environments. She set up a basic camp near her ship and began working on her damaged navigation computer. The problem was more serious than she had initially thought. Several key components had burned out completely and would need to be replaced or rebuilt from scratch. Amy spread her tools and spare parts on a makeshift work table and started the tedious process of diagnosing the failures. She had learned basic electronics from her father, who had been a ship mechanic before retiring to a quiet farming colony. The work was challenging, but Amy enjoyed solving technical problems and had plenty of time to figure things out. On the second day, she noticed she was being watched. Something large was moving behind. A cluster of ancient stone pillars about 50 yards from her camp. Amy caught glimpses of green scales and golden eyes, but whatever was watching her seemed more curious than threatening. She continued working on her repairs while keeping one eye on her mysterious observer. Amy had encountered many strange creatures during her years of interstellar travel and had learned that most were harmless if treated with respect. When she stopped for lunch, Amy decided to test her theory about her hidden visitor. She opened an extra ration pack and placed it on a flat rock halfway between her camp and the stone pillars. Then she returned to her work table and pretended to ignore the food offering. After about an hour, Amy heard the sound of something large moving carefully through the underbrush. When she looked up, the ration pack was gone, but her visitor had retreated back to the safety of the stone pillars. Amy smiled and returned to her work. She was making good progress on the navigation repairs, but some of the circuits were proving more difficult than expected. The next morning, Amy found herself with company. A magnificent dragon with emerald green scales was sitting about 20 feet away. Watching her work with obvious interest, Amy had never seen a real dragon before, but she had heard stories and legends from travelers who claimed to have encountered them on distant worlds. This dragon was much larger than she had expected, standing nearly 30 feet tall with wings that could probably carry it across continents. But despite its impressive size, the creature seemed gentle and curious rather than aggressive. Amy continued working while talking softly to her unexpected companion. She explained what each component did and why she needed to repair her navigation system. The dragon listened with remarkable attention, tilting its massive head and focusing its golden eyes on her hands as she worked. Amy found the dragon's presence oddly comforting. She had been alone in space for so long that having any kind of companion was welcome, even if it happened to be a legendary creature. By the third day, 2 more dragons had joined. The first one was a massive male with deep blue scales that shimmered like ocean water in the sunlight. The other was a smaller bronze-colored female who seemed particularly fascinated by the electronic components Amy was working with. Amy began to realize that these creatures were far more intelligent than most people believed. They appeared to understand not just her words but also the concepts she was explaining about technology and space travel. When Amy encountered a particularly stubborn circuit board, the large blue dragon carefully extended one claw to help hold delicate wires in place. The bronze female positioned herself to reflect sunlight onto Amy's work area, when shadows made it difficult to see the tiny components. Amy was amazed by their helpfulness and obvious desire to assist with her repairs. She had never experienced such cooperation from wild animals on any world she had visited. The dragons seemed to enjoy learning about human technology and asked questions using a complex system of chirps, growls, and wing gestures. Amy gradually began to understand their communication methods and found herself carrying on actual conversations with her new friends. They told her about their world using sounds and movements that painted pictures in her mind. Amy learned about hidden valleys filled with crystal formations and mountain peaks where dragons gathered to share stories and knowledge. The dragons were equally curious about Amy's life as a freight hauler. They wanted to know about distant stars and alien civilizations, and the various species Amy had encountered during her travels. Amy shared stories about the ice worlds of the Centauri system and the floating cities of the gas giant colonies. She described space stations larger than cities and asteroid mining operations that could crack open entire moons. The dragons listened with fascination to tales of interstellar trade routes and the complex politics of galactic commerce. Amy realized she was probably the first human these dragons had ever met. Most contact between humans and other species took place at official, diplomatic levels or through military encounters. Very few humans had the opportunity to form genuine friendships with alien creatures. Amy felt privileged to be sharing this experience with such magnificent beings. As her repairs neared completion, Amy found herself reluctant to leave her new friends. The dragons had shown her hidden caves filled with beautiful crystals and mountain streams where exotic fish swam in perfectly clear water. They had shared their food with her, bringing fresh fruit from trees that grew high on the mountain slopes. Amy had never experienced such hospitality from any species, human or alien. But her cargo was needed at the colony worlds, and she had responsibilities to fulfill. The dragons seemed to understand that. Amy would eventually have to leave. They gathered around her ship on the final day of repairs as if saying goodbye. Amy felt genuinely sad to part ways with creatures who had become so important to her in such a short time. Amy completed her navigation repairs just as the sun was setting behind the mountain peaks. Her 3 dragon friends had gathered around the ship to watch her final systems checks. The large blue male dragon that Amy had named Storm seemed particularly interested in the engine startup sequence. The bronze female, called Shine by Amy, was fascinated by the landing lights and communication equipment. The emerald green dragon Amy called Forest kept making soft chirping sounds that almost sounded like questions. Amy ran through her pre-flight checklist one final time to make sure everything was working properly. The navigation computer came online without any problems and immediately began calculating her position relative to known star systems. According to the data, she was only 2 jumps away from her original destination. Amy could complete her cargo delivery and be back on schedule within a few days. She felt both relief and sadness as she prepared to leave this beautiful world and her unlikely friends. Amy had grown genuinely attached to the 3 dragons during the week she had spent on their planet. They had shown her kindness and intelligence that challenged everything she thought she knew about alien species. Most importantly, they had treated her as an equal, rather than a curiosity or potential threat. Amy wished she could stay longer and learn more about dragon culture and society. But her cargo hold was filled with medical supplies that were desperately needed at the colony. Worlds delaying her delivery any further would put lives at risk. Amy walked around her ship one final time, saying goodbye to each of her dragon friends. Storm touched her gently on the shoulder with the tip of one massive claw. Shine made a series of musical sounds that Amy interpreted as a farewell song. Forest presented her with a beautiful crystal that glowed with its own internal light. Amy promised she would return someday if her trade routes ever brought her back to this sector of space. The dragons watched from a safe distance as Amy powered up her engines and lifted off from the planet's surface. They followed her ship to the edge of the atmosphere before finally turning back toward their mountain homes. Amy felt tears in her eyes as she watched them grow smaller and smaller on her rear display screen. She had never formed such strong emotional bonds with alien creatures before. The experience had changed her perspective on interspecies relationships and the potential for genuine friendship across biological boundaries. Amy set course for her first jump point and activated the autopilot system. Her cargo hold was secured and all systems were running smoothly. The repair job had been completely successful, and her navigation computer was working better than it had in years. Amy settled into her pilot seat for what should have been a routine journey to complete her delivery schedule. She was halfway to her destination when she heard strange sounds coming from the cargo bay. At first, Amy thought it might be shifting cargo or loose equipment rattling around during the jump transitions, but the sounds were too rhythmic and purposeful to be random mechanical noise. Amy activated the internal cameras to check on her cargo holds. What she saw on the monitor screens made her gasp in amazement. All 3 of her dragon friends were curled up comfortably among her supply containers. Storm had somehow squeezed his massive bulk between 2 rows of medical equipment crates. Shine was sleeping peacefully on top of a pile of food supplies. Forest was awake and looking directly at the security camera, as if he had been waiting for Amy to discover them. Amy stared at the monitor screens in complete disbelief. She had no idea how creatures so large could have hidden themselves in her cargo bay without her knowledge. More importantly, she had no idea how they were surviving in the vacuum of space. Dragons were supposed to be planetary creatures that needed air and proper atmospheric pressure. Amy quickly checked her environmental systems and was shocked to find that the cargo bay was still pressurized and filled with breathable air. Somehow the dragons had created their own life support bubble that maintained Earth normal conditions. Amy rushed back to the cargo bay and opened the main access door. The 3 dragons looked up at her with expressions that seemed almost guilty. They knew they had been caught stowing away on her ship. Storm made apologetic rumbling sounds while Shine tried to hide behind a stack of containers. Forrest approached Amy slowly and nuzzled her hand with his massive head. Amy realized that the dragons had followed her because they wanted to explore the galaxy and experience the adventures she had described. They had made a conscious decision to leave their home world and join her as traveling companions. Amy was faced with a difficult decision. She could try to return the dragons to their planet, but that would require several days of travel and would seriously delay her cargo delivery. More importantly, the dragons clearly did not want to go back home. They had chosen to come with her and had somehow overcome the technical challenges of space travel. Amy decided to continue her journey and figure out the implications later. She had always traveled alone, but the idea of having dragon companions was not entirely unwelcome. Her cargo bay was large enough to accommodate them, and they seemed perfectly capable of taking care of themselves. Amy made some quick modifications to her ship systems to ensure adequate life support for her unexpected passengers. The dragons watched with interest as she installed additional air recycling equipment and expanded the food storage capacity. They seemed to understand that their presence required changes to the ship configuration. Over the next few days, Amy began to understand how remarkable her new companions really were. The dragons possessed natural abilities that made them ideal space travelers. They could generate protective energy fields around their bodies that allowed them to survive in vacuum. They had an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional navigation that rivaled her ship. Computer. Most importantly, they seemed to genuinely enjoy exploring new worlds and meeting different species. Amy realized that she had accidentally stumbled upon the perfect crew for her freight hauling business. The dragons were intelligent, helpful, and completely fearless in dangerous situations. They could also serve as protection against the pirates and raiders that sometimes attacked cargo ships in remote sectors. When Amy finally reached her destination, the dragons created quite a sensation at the spaceport. Nobody had ever seen such magnificent creatures, up close, and crowds gathered wherever Amy landed. Colony officials were amazed that she had managed to form such close bonds with beings that were considered mythically dangerous. Amy found herself famous throughout the sector as the human who had befriended the legendary dragons of Draconis Prime. News of her success spread quickly through galactic communication networks. The same military forces that had failed so spectacularly on the Dragon world were astounded to learn that a simple freight hauler had achieved the impossible. Amy had not only survived contact with the dragons, but had actually convinced 3 of them to join her crew voluntarily. News of Amy Rodriguez and her dragon companions spread across the galaxy faster than anyone could have imagined. Within days, every major news network was running stories about the human freight hauler who had achieved what elite military forces could not. Scientists demanded interviews while military commanders tried to understand how she had succeeded where they had failed. Amy found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never wanted or expected. Reporters followed her ship from port to port trying to get exclusive stories about her relationship with the Dragon's government officials from dozens of worlds, sent formal requests for diplomatic meetings. Amy had always preferred the quiet life of a simple cargo hauler, but suddenly everyone in the galaxy wanted to know her secrets. The Dragons seemed to enjoy their newfound celebrity status. Storm liked to pose dramatically for photographs while displaying his magnificent blue scales. Shine delighted in demonstrating her ability to create beautiful light patterns using her bronze-colored hide. Forest remained the most reserved of the 3, but clearly took pride in the respect they were receiving from other species. Amy soon discovered that having dragon crew members made her job much easier in many ways. Pirates and raiders took one look at her companions and decided to find easier targets elsewhere. Corrupt port officials who usually demanded bribes suddenly became very polite and helpful. Cargo inspectors processed her shipments with unprecedented speed and efficiency. The Dragons proved to be excellent crew members with natural instincts for space travel and navigation. They could detect mechanical problems before her diagnostic equipment registered any issues. Their keen senses allowed them to spot potential dangers long before they became serious threats. Most importantly, they seemed to genuinely enjoy exploring different worlds and learning about alien cultures. Amy began accepting more challenging delivery contracts to remote and dangerous locations. With her dragon protection, she could safely travel to worlds that other freight haulers avoided. This allowed her to charge premium rates and build a reputation for reliable service under any conditions. The Dragons adapted quickly to life aboard a cargo vessel. They learned to operate basic ship systems and could even perform simple maintenance tasks. Storm became expert at loading and securing cargo, using his massive strength and careful precision. Shine developed an uncanny ability to communicate with alien species using a combination of sounds, gestures, and telepathic impressions. Forrest proved to have remarkable mechanical aptitude and could diagnose engine problems by listening to subtle changes in operational sounds. Amy realized that she had stumbled upon something far more valuable than a simple business partnership. Her relationship with the Dragons represented a new form of interspecies cooperation that could change how different races interacted. Throughout the galaxy, military analysts studied her success, trying to understand the principles that had allowed her to succeed where force had failed. The answer seemed to lie in her approach of treating the Dragons as equals, rather than prizes. To be captured, Amy had shown genuine respect for their intelligence and had taken time to understand their needs and desires. She had offered friendship instead of domination and had been rewarded with loyalty that money could never buy. Xenobiologists were fascinated by the Dragons' abilities to survive in space and adapt to technological environments. The energy fields they could generate around their bodies defied current scientific understanding. Their natural navigation instincts suggested they possessed senses that could detect gravitational fields and stellar radiation patterns. Most intriguingly, they seemed to have some form of collective consciousness that allowed them to share information instantaneously across vast distances. Amy learned that her 3 companions were in constant contact with Dragons throughout the galaxy. They served as ambassadors, sharing news and experiences with their kind on dozens of different worlds. Through them, Amy gained access to a vast network of intelligence and resources that spanned multiple star systems. The Dragons began introducing Amy to members of their species on other planets. Each world she visited seemed to have Dragons who had heard about her and wanted to meet the famous human friend. Amy discovered that Dragon society was far more complex and sophisticated than anyone had realized. They had their own culture, traditions, and technology that remained hidden from most galactic civilizations. Some Dragons possessed abilities that bordered on the supernatural, including limited time perception and dimensional manipulation. Others had developed biotechnology that could heal injuries and extend lifespans far beyond normal limits. Amy found herself becoming an unofficial ambassador between human civilization and the Dragon communities scattered throughout space. She carried messages and gifts between different Dragon populations while learning about their history and philosophy. The Dragons shared stories about ancient times when their species had been more numerous and influential in galactic affairs. They had withdrawn from contact with younger civilizations after experiencing conflicts and misunderstandings. Amy represented the first successful attempt at genuine friendship between Dragons and other species in thousands of years. Her success inspired hope that better relationships might be possible in the future. Government representatives from major powers began approaching Amy with requests for formal diplomatic meetings. They wanted her to arrange negotiations between their civilizations and the Dragon communities. Amy found herself in the unique position of being the only being trusted by both sides. The Dragons respected her honesty and genuine concern for their welfare. Human and alien governments saw her as their best chance for establishing profitable relationships with powerful new allies. Amy realized that her simple freight-hauling career had evolved into something much larger and more significant. She was now responsible for shaping the future of interspecies relations across multiple star systems. The weight of this responsibility sometimes overwhelmed her, but she knew she could not abandon the role fate had given her. Amy continued her cargo runs, but now they served a dual purpose. Each delivery became an opportunity to strengthen bonds between different species and promote understanding. Her ship became a traveling embassy where representatives from various civilizations could meet. On neutral ground, the Dragons proved to be excellent diplomats with an intuitive understanding of what different species needed to feel comfortable and secure. Amy Rodriguez had started as an unknown freight hauler with a broken navigation computer and had ended up as one of the most influential figures in galactic politics. Her story became a legend that inspired countless others to look beyond their prejudices and fear. The galaxy learned that sometimes the greatest achievements come not from superior technology or military might, but from simple human qualities like kindness, respect, and the willingness to see others as equals. Amy and her dragon friends continued to travel the stars together, proving every day that friendship could overcome any barrier.